Bright green environmentalists are people who believe that technological changes and reforms will make industrial civilization sustainable. And we wrote the book Bright Green Lies to refute this idea, to expose the lies. Technologies like solar panels, wind turbines, electric cars, geothermal energy, and so on, they're not good for the planet. In fact, they're extremely harmful to the planet. Lithium demand is skyrocketing around the world because electric car batteries are lithium-ion batteries. And as solar and wind energy expand, they need more and more energy storage to smooth out the electrical supply for times when the wind isn't blowing. I'm looking for something deeper. It's because I'm looking for something that's more meaningful than what this dominant culture that we live in feeds us as normal, which is an obsession with material objects, with wealth, with possessions, with a superficial layer of reality. When the truth is that we are part of this incredible mystery of life on Earth, that we are literally made up of the stuff of this planet, that we emerged from the soil, from the oceans, from the water, the air, from all these primordial elements that somehow magically formed life, that evolved into human beings, walking and talking on this planet, thinking, speaking to you right now, listening to this video. And when we lose touch with that miracle, we get distracted by the materiality of the world. Understanding that there is a deeper level to life, there are deeper and more important levels to this experience.
A handful of construction crews moving dirt around, setting up a water pipeline. But the Canada-based company, which also mines lithium in Argentina, estimates when it's up and running in about 3 years, the facility will produce 40,000 tons of lithium carbonate a year. In today's prices, that's more than $1.6 billion, with a chemical processing facility right next door, so the ore can be processed into lithium carbonate on site. The mine will have about a 200-acre footprint and should be in production around the end of 2026.
Instead of trying to defend the living world, they're trying to defend an energy system that can continue to provide power to the industrial civilization. In the face of peak oil and declining energy availability, it's no surprise that these technologies have become more and more popular. But they don't reflect environmentalism. They don't reflect a care for the living planet. I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see the environmental movement split, even more so than it has already. I think the grassroots movement, indigenous peoples, many folks who truly prioritize the land, the health of the land, are going to be moving in a completely different direction than the mainstream climate movement, which will align itself with business interests, with corporations, with mainstream political parties, to produce as much green energy as possible, so-called green energy. Because we're at a turning point in our society, turning point in our world. And we have a choice. Do we go further down the path towards a machine world, a machine culture? Or do we turn around and head in a different direction?
Well, good evening, everyone out in the chat. And Max, welcome to Environmental Coffee House. Max Wilbert, it's been over 3 years by 1 month that I have had you as my guest. Max
It's great
Wilbert,
to be back.
Radical environmentalist, activist, anti a lot of things, pro a lot of things. We're going to talk about those things. But you know what I want to start with? I want you to introduce yourself a little bit. You're the co-author of Bright Green Lies with Derek Jensen and Leash Care, Keith, and your Biocentric Substack. You do videos. You're very, very accomplished. And the big thing that was in the last several years was the Thacker Pass lithium mine, and now it's happening. So let's hear from you. How are you? Who are you? In case there are people that don't know, and let's go. Welcome.
Well, it's great to be here with you, Sandy. Thanks again for having me. I'm a little bit tired because I got woken up at 6 this morning by my nephew jumping on me
Oh boy.
to start his day off with wrestling. So I'm an uncle for one, but I'm an environmentalist. I'm an organizer, a grassroots community organizer. I grew up in Seattle and came of age politically in the post WTO period, when there was this very rich political culture, this ferment going on with all this cross pollination between different groups, union groups, environmental groups, labor organizers, folks who are doing indigenous solidarity with the Zapatista movement, anarchists, anti-globalization activists, and those critiquing and organizing against corporate power around the world. All kinds of different folks working together. And so I was very blessed and lucky to just sort of stumble into that because of where I live and my background. And that early political education was really key for me in drawing a lot of linkages between the issues that we're facing in the world today. Of course, so many people operate in these very blinkered spheres of looking at global issues and don't see the connections between the different issues often, which is one reason why so many of the problems that we're facing get perpetuated and get worse. We're going to talk a lot about the issues around green technology and green energy. And to me, that is, these problems are arising exactly because you have people who are environmentalists who've had this sort of narrow focus on climate, which is a very important issue.
Yes.
But they don't have a great understanding of colonialism, of resource extraction, of geopolitics, and how the relationship between resource extraction, capitalism, and war plays out on the world today. How modern trade is itself a form of warfare waged against the poorest places, the poorest communities on the planet, and the planet itself. And so we're going to dive into that. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm a writer, co-author of Bright Green Lies, as you mentioned.
Yes.
I'm currently studying for a master's in degrowth, which I have a lot of critiques of the degrowth movement myself. I can say a lot of great things about it, but I have a lot of serious critiques of it. But nonetheless, I decided to do this.
That's
master's
great.
thing.
Why not?
Who knows? Who knows if I'll regret it afterwards or not? But yeah, I'm an organizer, and like you said, mostly focused on this Thacker Pass lithium mine over the last 3 years. That mine is currently being built. The land is being destroyed, so we failed in our campaign to protect that place, which we can talk about the reasons and the strategy and so on. But that, in some ways, that work continues around other lithium mines and other projects in the region, working with the allies that we developed during that campaign. And we're also still facing a lawsuit. Myself and 6 other people, including 4 native folks from Paiute and Shoshone communities in the area, are being sued by the mining company Lithium Nevada. So we're facing this lawsuit right now and are currently battling that out in court. So that's a little bit about me.
Exactly. What are they suing you for?
Well, in April, May, and June of last year, full-scale construction of the Thacker Pass lithium mine began. So after, 2.5, nearly 3 years of me and a bunch of other people opposing this mine, exposing the fact that it was on a Paiute sacred site where massacres of indigenous people took place, exposing the fact that it's a biodiversity hotspot that's incredibly important to wildlife, bringing lawsuits against the project, doing community organizing, taking part in all the public commenting sessions, reaching out to politicians, all kinds of different strategies. It all failed. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but the primary one is that the legal system in the United States is set up to facilitate resource extraction. That's one of its main jobs.
Resource
And
extraction and corruption.
absolutely, yeah, the laws have been set up to prioritize resource extraction. And there's a
Mhm.
law in the books called the 1872 Mining Law, the General Mining Act, which it's 152 years old at this point,
Wow.
and it is to call it outdated is ridiculous. It's so anachronistic. This law was signed by President Ulysses Grant after when he became president after the Civil War, and they put this law in place to pay off the Civil War debt.
Mm.
So there's a direct line here between the opening of the West for colonial westward expansion and manifest destiny, which in Nevada and in that region was a lot about mining. It was about getting access to the mountains for silver and gold mining at that time,
Mm-hmm.
which involved massacring and clearing out the indigenous communities. And today, when the land is being destroyed by this new wave, it's just a new type of exploration and destruction as a new resource has become valuable. So we are being sued because in April, May, and June, after all the other tactics failed, a number of folks, including myself, went out there under the direction of some Paiute elders and did prayers on the site, which happened to block the construction of the mine. We were praying directly in the path of their constructing a water pipeline to suck out 5 million gallons a day for their project. And they didn't like that, of course. So they took a different strategy. Corporations have actually been evolving and shifting their tactics in response to popular movements of nonviolent direct action and protest, like what we saw at Standing Rock, most famously in recent years, Fairy Creek and many other places. And corporations are increasingly using a strategy where rather than calling in the police to arrest people, they try and identify key organizers and then target them with lawsuits. Yeah. And so that's what they're doing to us. They're suing us for being involved in this nonviolent action, this prayer action at the site, disrupting their operations in some way, they claim. And
well, obviously it didn't, because they're going on with it. And I've been watching videos about what's going on there. And there was a Channel 2 in Nevada. I don't know, but they did a piece on what's going on there, and they tried very hard to show the activist side, but they really did come off with, well, listen, the Lithium Americas, they're going to build a school on the reservation, a child daycare, they're going to build a big school in the town nearest there, they're building, bringing jobs, development opportunities all around. So it's really business as usual, growth. And they're suing you, and it's costing you money. So they want to deter other people that are activists from doing what you did.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's quite disgusting.
The way I always explain it is that in places like the Philippines and Colombia and Mexico, environmental defenders get assassinated, right? In Guatemala, in El Salvador, all over the world, people who stand up for the land, they get arrested, they get beat up, they get tortured, their property gets destroyed, their houses get burned, and they get killed in many cases, right? In the United States, it's difficult to get away with that, luckily, because of a long history of people fighting for civil rights and fighting for liberty, which, we can thank all those people through multiple generations for their amazing hard work, fighting to give us some of the rights and protections that we do have, which are constantly being eroded and are constantly under attack. But nonetheless, this is the best they can do here, or the worst that they can do to us, among the worst things that they can do to us. So that's what they're trying to do. And, this same company actually, so Lithium Nevada Corporation, they recently split in two. They separated their operations in North America from their operations in Argentina.
Yes.
And so they have a mine down in Argentina, which is now a separate corporation. These corporations are always splitting and merging and all these different things, all to gain better access to um, to tax
Resources.
write-offs and
Hmm.
subsidies and reduce liability and all these different things. But down there's been mass movements led by indigenous communities and rural local communities against the lithium mines, which have been pumping all the water, desertifying the landscapes, leaving people completely destitute. And, there have been credible allegations down there of security forces sexually abusing protesters, attacking
Oh my
protesters.
gosh.
So you're getting, this company, like pretty much every other mining company in the world, is involved in massive and serious human rights violations, not just in the US, but elsewhere. And they like to, try and wipe their hands clean and put up smoke screens and have good press releases about environmental and
Oh,
social
sure.
governance,
That's what Channel
ESG, and all
2.
that stuff.
Channel 2
Right.
showed the guy that was in charge of the area, and he was talking about how everything went through the Bureau of Land Management, and we all know that they're so above board and really use the science. If you watch Lyle Lyle's video with me, his
Hmm.
interview, Racing to Extinction, he talks about that because he worked for the Bureau of Land Management. And he says nothing is really based on the science.
Yeah.
Nothing. And he did it. So Lyle Lewis. Okay, so this is where you are. And now what?
Now, what is a great question. So we're
Yeah.
still involved in our legal defense. This case is probably going to drag on for, I don't know, another 6 months to a year or more.
Oh my
Um,
God.
we are lucky to have a couple lawyers who are taking the case on pro bono, but we also need a local lawyer who we have to pay. And for those who don't know, the discount rate for an attorney in a case like this is like $350 an hour. So we're fundraising and trying to bring support in because we're all poor. We're all working class people. I
Yeah.
mean, I've been under the poverty line my entire life. So we're
Right.
fundraising to support the legal defense. But on the organizing side, we're going to be continuing to fight the Thacker Pass mine when and where opportunities arise. They're going to try and expand that mine, double it in size. They
And
have
what did
more
they say?
mining
It's 200
claims.
acres now? Or is it more?
Actually, the project now is about 6,000
Oh,
acres
it's
is the area that they've done.
6,000 acres.
6,000 acres. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I'm just
what's the size of a housing lot, like a piece of land in the average city? Like a quarter of an acre is a big lot, right?
6,000.
So imagine 18,000 of those, and you get a sense of the size of this mine. And that's just the direct impact. That's the land that they're actually bulldozing.
Right.
Beyond that, for many, many miles in every direction, you have the impacts of the air pollution, the water pollution, dust, toxic dust blowing off their toxic tailings waste, and all the stuff they pile up after they dig it out and put sulfuric acid all over it to leach out and burn out the lithium. You've got the
Yeah.
sound pollution, which is actually a very big and important form of impact on wildlife that many people don't consider, is just
Nope.
the noise. A lot of wildlife will not stick in the area if they're hearing loud machinery and engines and blasting explosives and so on. They'll run away, even if they're a mile or 2 miles or 3 miles or more in some cases from the actual edge of the mining operations themselves.
Hmm.
They'll flee. So the impacts, they ripple out throughout the entire landscape, and they're very
They're
significant.
losing their habitat by the minute. And didn't they buy a farm that was a large farm for the water resources? That's what
That's right.
I saw. So
Yeah.
not only that, and that was upsetting to the local people
Mhm.
about the farm. They're worried about their water, but on the other hand, they're what are they going to do? They said, well, we need on the reservation, we need help. We need financial help, and that's where they have the carrot.
Yeah, I was on a webinar the other day. It was just a public webinar. I wasn't speaking or anything, but it was some folks down in the southeastern U.S. who are fighting biomass energy projects, another form of greenwashing,
Mhm.
cutting down trees, grinding them
To
into
make
pellets, and burning
pellets,
them
the worst.
to make, yeah, to burn in power plants. often shipped overseas to especially the UK and Germany for burning. Company called Drax has been involved in huge scandals for massive carbon emissions, like half again as much carbon emissions as a coal-fired power plant. So the greenwashing is absolutely astounding. But this woman, Dr. Treva Gear, I believe was her name, with the Dogwood Alliance down there in Georgia.
Yeah.
She had a term for this. She called it poverty pimping. When these corporations go into poor communities, desperate communities where people are struggling to make ends meet, and they offer them, a pittance, almost nothing. And people take it because they're desperate. They have no other options.
And that's what Lithium America is doing.
That's what they do. And that is a form of exploitation, right? I mean, that's why I say that's why, most women who are in prostitution, you can't say that they chose it because it was a constrained choice. They were in a desperate, terrible situation, and it was the only option available to them to survive, right? Sure, maybe the occasional 1 in 1,000 chooses it, but most of the people who are there are desperate. They have no choice, right? And so they're essentially being forced. They're being coerced into taking these deals. And that's the situation with Fort McDermott, which is the one tribe out of dozens of regional tribes in the area that actually made a deal with the mining company. All the other tribes are opposed to it. 3 tribes have successfully filed a lawsuit against the project. I say successfully because they actually were able to go through with the lawsuit. They didn't win because, again, the legal system is set up to prioritize mining. And another tribe tried to file a lawsuit, but the judge wouldn't allow them to get involved. And many other tribes have spoken out against the project and passed resolutions opposing it and so on. This one tribe made a deal with the mining company. And actually, what a lot of people don't know is they had a deal with the mining company, and the tribal community there, a very small community, I'm friends with a lot of folks there, they organized and they did a referendum where they all could vote. Should we continue to work with Lithium Nevada or should we not? And people voted to not. People voted to withdraw from the agreement with the mining company and file a lawsuit against the mining company, to join the tribe's lawsuit fighting the lithium mine. The tribal council withdrew from the agreement with the mining company. They didn't file a lawsuit, partly, I think, out of just incompetence. I mean, the tribal council at the time was not. I mean, these are volunteers. They're essentially trying to run an entire government, a sovereign nation,
right?
And they're volunteers. I mean, this is like, it's absurd to me, the level of resources that many of these tribes have, and they're supposed to be able to somehow engage in meaningful government-to-government consultations with the behemoth, the powerhouse that is the United States.
Yeah, well, that was by design.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, the level of abuse and corruption throughout this entire process of the Thacker Pass lithium mine permitting and coming into operation has just been stunning. Absolutely.
But your average citizen who saw the news report that I saw, the compilation, I watched them all, would say, well, if they understand climate change, they're going to say, well, what are we going to do if we don't get this stuff to change or transition over to renewable energy? So people are brainwashed, and as Nate Hagen says, they're energy blind.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
And it's a real conundrum because for every maybe one that wins, we won here against the pipeline here, the Northern Access Pipeline back in 2017. We actually won, and it's not been built. Yeah. It's not been built. It was a big thing. I was very involved at that time. I mean, all the meetings and all. But everybody on my channel knows about it because I say it all the time. But we won. But it was around the same time as Standing Rock, but that's very few and far between. And it's very unfortunate because I had hopium for a while for you. I mean, I really did. I was like, very, very behind you and excited. But when I realized how big of an opponent you were
Yeah.
going up against, you and Will, I mean, in the beginning, camping out, almost insurmountable. And now look at us. And so again, I circle back to now what?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good question. And, I wish that I could say I had the silver bullet, but the reality is, people like me and you and many folks who are listening have been trying to figure out how to change the course of the planet on these issues for literally centuries.
Yes.
Certainly many decades, but literally centuries if you go back, and failing. And we've been failing, and there are a lot of different reasons for that. But, one of the primary ones that I think kind of goes back to the roots of the issue is if you are willing to cut down your trees and blow up your mountain, you can make better weapons of war, and you can expand your population, and you can grow your cities, and you can create income and jobs and so on, more than people who refuse to do that. And that's what growth has been in this culture, has been that process of ecological imperialism playing out, the interplay between violence against the land and then the violence of economic growth and the imperialism and war that has gone with that. And that, I'm part of an organization called Deep Green Resistance, which has a strategy, which I think is sort of a last ditch effort in many ways. It's like, what do we do when we recognize that our backs are against the wall, that everything is headed in the wrong direction? Every indicator of health and biodiversity and well-being of this planet, the future of our children and future generations, is plummeting. It's headed in the exact wrong direction at a faster and faster rate. And technology isn't changing it. All the best policies in the world aren't changing it. All the goodwill in the world isn't changing it. Education isn't changing it. Not to say those things are useless, but they have not been sufficient, self-evidently, right? So what do we do? And, DGR, the book, lays out some, I think, radical strategies that are worth considering and worth talking about, largely centered around coordinated campaigns of eco-sabotage to try and, I don't know if I can say this on your show or if I'm getting you blacklisted right now, but
don't worry about my show. You say what you need to say.
This is very radical stuff, and a lot of people don't like to hear it. It's very dangerous to even talk about. People will start attacking you right off the bat, and what's the backlash going to be, and all these things. Very good questions. Absolutely worth considering and having in-depth conversations about. And that said, the people who are promoting other strategies, who are promoting, working through government engagement, through education, through mass movements, nonviolent direct action, all things which I have been part of and continue to be a part of and support. We need to recognize that those strategies aren't working. They're not enough to reverse the situation that we're in. This is increasingly being recognized by other folks all around the world.
Roger Hallam.
We saw, the publication of How to Blow Up a Pipeline, that book, and then the film based on it a couple years ago. Folks may be familiar with, I don't know if you know this book, Sandy, but the book, The Ministry for the Future, that Kim Stanley Robinson, science fiction author, wrote. That book, it's sort of a near-term future. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's a fictional book. They call it climate fiction, cli-fi. It's a whole genre these days. Oh, I caused balloons to happen. Sorry about that.
I don't even know how to shut that off.
So anyway, this book, it's a near future. Climate change is accelerating. Biodiversity collapse is accelerating. Everything's getting worse. And it traces how people are attempting to deal with it, partly through this Ministry for the Future, which is basically a UN body that helps change policies and so on. But part of what's in that book is that radical underground movements start to form, and they start to take very dramatic actions, violent actions in some cases, but certainly eco-sabotage actions, because they see no other option, absolutely no other option to change the course of the situation. And, I'm somebody who talks about these things openly. It's challenging to discuss, But the reality is, like, look back at the movement against apartheid. You had the BDS campaign, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which people are using that strategy against Israel today. But then, the key part of the South African anti-apartheid campaign was Nelson Mandela and the ANC and the people organizing on the ground in South Africa, who, many young people don't know this history. They were banned. The group was banned. It was made illegal to be a part of the ANC. And they went underground and formed a military army and started sabotaging oil pipelines and diamond mines and transmission lines. And Nelson Mandela was on the U.S. terrorist watch list. And that's what he went to prison for. That's why
I know the story.
That's why they put him on the island, right? Because he was considered a terrorist. And now we look back and consider this man one of the great freedom fighters of history. There's plenty of things you can critique about what happened in the transition out, and there's a lot of problems in South Africa today. But there are many historical precedents for people being put in situations where no strategies are working. There are no other options. And this is something that, of course, Kennedy talked about when he made his famous speech, right? Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And we're living in a situation increasingly where peaceful revolution is being made impossible. Every single avenue of change is being foreclosed, whether it's through the courts, through legislation at the state and local and federal levels, whether it's through these international systems of power like the WTO and the World Bank and these obscure legal systems set up through free trade agreements that make it illegal for entire countries to have sovereignty over things like saying no to mining in their territories. We saw this recently when I believe it was El Salvador completely outlawed mining in their entire country. I might be wrong. It might not be El Salvador.
Ecuador? Was it Ecuador? Somebody could look it up.
It wasn't Ecuador.
Out there in the
Ecuador.
chat, somebody look it up. America. Who outlawed mining? Somebody will give us the answer.
Right.
So you continue.
But they're being sued in this sort of international court of arbitration based on free trade agreements that say corporations can sue a nation when that nation takes away their ability to make profit on projects that they'd already invested in. So all these avenues for change are being foreclosed. And I don't feel good about this. I don't feel happy about that situation. Can I swear on this show?
Fuck yeah.
Sandy? Because it's fucking grim what is happening. And,
I did not monetize this for ads.
Right.
Because they won't let me anyway.
This cage is closing around all of us tighter and tighter. And, I think that we have to at least be willing to discuss and have these conversations about more radical tactics and strategies. They're not easy. The moral questions are deep and challenging and complex. But if we're not going to have it now in this ecological apocalypse, when are we going to have it?
Well, we feel like we're on the right side. But what's happening in the United States with the white Christian nationalist movement, all the underground, prepping, arming, and all that? Well, what side are they on? They're not environmentalists, and a lot of times they're denialists of all this stuff. Yeah. They think they're still in we have dominion over the planet. And how come they're pseudo-successful? Do we need so maybe we need to have tactics that are a little bit more radical than even you're saying. And little me is saying it.
I think one of the things that you see across the right, we're not necessarily just the far right and militia groups and so on, but across the right is very effective grassroots organizing tactics over the last 10 to 20 years. From the rise of the Tea Party in the early Sarah Palin to Trump and so on, to this taking power at the local level and building up from there and building this sort of grassroots movement.
Yeah. That's what we need to do.
For some very grim things in a lot of cases, a lot of things that I disagree with very fundamentally. You can't deny that they've been effective in their strategies. Now, when I think about like the right-wing preppers, first, I think there's actually a lot of preppers who aren't necessarily right wing. They're folks like us who just see.
Well, yeah, I sometimes say, "Oh, I'm a prepper," because I have
Yeah.
6 months of canned food and I've grown it, or whatever I have, but it's a different mindset, totally.
Yeah, I live in Oregon, so I'm mostly thinking about the big earthquake. But yeah, I've got some supplies stocked away and so on. Not crazy.
No, not
Because
crazy.
survival in these challenging situations is really about community. It's not about the individual, the
Yep.
heroic individual.
And we
like that
talk
American
about this on this
story.
channel. This channel covers a
Yeah,
lot of those
yeah.
topics, and we
Mhm.
don't we guys out there in the chat, we talk about these things all the time. I cover the
Yeah.
gamut because as I named it Environmental Coffee House, everything under the environmental umbrella, which is a big umbrella, we talk about it here. And I do politics also, so I can't help myself sometimes. But it's all interchangeable.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And you see that, I refer to the Democrats and the Republicans as to the two wings of the corporate party, of the capitalist corporate party.
Well, yeah,
They're
they
both
are.
bought and paid for. I was just reading today about the nuclear bills, pro-nuclear energy bills that are moving through Congress right now, bipartisan effort to promote nuclear energy. One of the most destructive technologies on which the modern environmental movement was literally built to fight nuclear power, among other things, nuclear
And now it's
weapons, nuclear
supported.
testing, uranium mining, refining, the entire complex, the military industrial complex of the nuclear industry.
It's
And now it's being
desperation
promoted.
because it's
madness.
desperation. If they're
It is.
if they're believing, not everybody see, and I look at the two parties. There's good in some on the left. I mean, I'm involved with a progressive type of movement, but the one thing is there's fascism on the horizon, and there are some very ugly people on the horizon that if they get in control, it's going to be a lot worse. So even if you want to do radical underground extremist type of environmental activism, I don't know if we're even going to be able to have YouTube channels.
Yeah,
You
and
have to
for
admit
me,
that's a threat.
it is, yeah, and I don't believe in a dichotomy between revolution versus reform. I think that they're part of the same process of social change, a spectrum of social change, and we need to be working at different levels. For myself, I talk about these radical tactics and strategies, and I talk about them very publicly. So because of that, I sort of have a target on my back, right? I'm being sued and targeted by this mining company right now. They're probably watching this broadcast right now. They probably have somebody watching. I know they're on my email list for my newsletter because they brought it up in court. They brought it up in these court filings, one of the posts that I had on there. So they're watching everything that I'm doing. I've been contacted by the FBI. They didn't have anything on me because I didn't do anything.
Right,
but just
you didn't.
They wanted to try and pump me for information, and I said, I'm not going to talk to you.
And talking about something that's theoretical doesn't mean you're down there in the trenches, a la the Second Amendment people,
Well, yeah, and
they're looking up the wrong trees.
It's scary for people to consider these things, right? The FBI called me. Like, that is objectively scary, to be targeted by these law enforcement agencies that have a lot of power. And the truth is, like, Martin Luther King had a massive FBI file, so using nonviolent tactics doesn't prevent you. And he was assassinated, right? Yeah. So it doesn't protect you from the power of the state. Far from it. And we see this so often, is that whenever people are effective, there's going to be pushback. There's going to be a reaction. There's going to be a force brought to bear in one way or another. One example, you brought up the right-wing militias. So one organizing example that I bring up sometimes is Fred Hampton in Chicago with the Black Panther Party, who, the Black Panthers, there's a lot you can say about them, a lot of really wonderful things, but also very legitimate critiques about the Black Panther Party. But Hampton in Chicago he formed this rainbow coalition, which a lot of people don't know. You know, it was the Black Panthers, it was the Young Lords, which was the radical Latino organization. And it was the Young Patriots, which a lot of people don't know. It was like this radical white only group that was anti-racist, anti-imperialist, and yet had the Confederate flag as part of their symbol. Kind of a very different time, right? That was 50 years ago. So maybe I don't fully understand that. I can't say that I wasn't there, right? I don't understand all the politics around that and all the details around that. I'm sure there was a lot of critiques from some people of that alliance, but there was a deliberate attempt to build bridges with white working class organizations like that on some sort of fundamental anti-racist principles and principles of solidarity. That's something that, you know, we haven't seen very much in this country. I still think one of the biggest mistakes Hillary Clinton made in that first campaign against Trump was when she talked about the deplorables, right?
She alienated a whole generation of people.
Right. And many of whom may hold views that I think are deplorable. Like, I'm not denying that at all.
But you know what, Max?
At some point, when you're trying to build political change and build political coalitions, we have to work from an aspirational place.
But what did her opponent do?
Together, right?
What did he do?
Yeah.
The bar was lowered in 2016 forever, or my foreseeable future. The bar has been lowered. She did it as a response to him doing it, and we have lost it. We don't have a lot. I mean, we don't even have an ethical government at all. Did we ever? I don't know, but it's a lot worse.
No, no, we didn't.
I mean, I've been waiting my whole life.
Right. There is this rising strain of right-wing populist authoritarianism, which is a predictable response to a desperate situation in a lot of ways. You know, a lot of people, most people in this culture have some form of PTSD, I think. And when you learn about complex PTSD, one of the features is you get this Stockholm Syndrome type situation where, you know, many people were abused by their fathers, and yet they continue to love and defer to and respect these sort of domineering patriarchal father figures because they represent some sort of stability and protection, despite the fact that that's where the abuse came from in people's childhood.
I think I represent some of that, Max, literally in my life.
Right. And you can see the Democrats play to this too, when they try and get real tough and, you know, they do the exact same thing. It's so much of the political process is sort of about manipulating people's emotions by understanding the psychology of abuse and control. I mean, this is the great insight of, you know, Chomsky and all the people who've studied media and mass manipulation and manufacturing consent
and all fear porn, as what I was thinking all about that today, because I'm formulating something I want to do, and it's all fear porn. And Americans, particularly, I don't know about other countries, are steeped in fear. They walk in fear. Manufactured fear against immigrants, immigrant crime, you know, all of that. We are the most manipulated and gaslit, I think.
Yeah.
And we think we're not.
You're right, Sandy. And it reminds me of a couple things. You know, one is Hannah Arendt, who wrote The Origins of Totalitarianism, you know, after World War II. She wrote, the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, i.e. the reality of experience, and the distinction between true and false, i.e. the standards of thought, no longer exist. And I am seeing that being eroded on the right and on the left very seriously. And very seriously. We are seeing this erosion.
And what about social media throwing that into the mix from her time to now? I mean, you know, why do you think they call us doomers? Jeez.
Well, you know, I like to be a realist, and you know, there have been many desperate situations throughout human history, and this may be one of the more desperate in terms of the big picture. You know, it's For some of us, it's less desperate. Like here I am in a warm little cabin and I'm going to go have dinner after this. Like objectively, my life is pretty fine, but I
Right.
live in the United States. I'm a white male.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
have
You
I don't have
suck,
any major
Max.
diseases. Yeah, I suck.
No, no,
But,
you don't.
but you know, that the same is not true if you're living in Pakistan right now. If you're a rural farmer in Pakistan and the land is desertifying around you. I was just reading this article the other day about unexpected effect of solar panels. So the decline in price of solar panels has made them available to farmers all around the world who are often using them to sink wells and power deep wells to pump groundwater out of the ground in areas where they couldn't get power or electricity
No.
before. And this is allowing aquifers to get depleted at a rate that was not possible. It was not physically possible before. So this is sort of an unexpected. This is, if people have read Bright Green Lies or are familiar with my work, you'll know about Jevons paradox, which is this idea that as you get more efficiency within an industrial process, often that efficiency doesn't lead to less resource use, it leads to more resource use. And solar panels in this context are a great example of that, right? Everyone thinks, oh, solar panels, less waste, this is a less destructive technology for energy than burning fossil fuels and so on. But then, in this specific case, you get this knockoff effect that's very unexpected.
Sure.
It's
being used for nefarious purposes, which are veiled because they're not sold as nefarious.
Right. And, you can't even blame the individual farmers in a sense, because, if you're really in a desperate situation,
Yes.
Your land's desertifying, your well's gone dry or something like that, or, you just can't feed your family and you need a little bit more water to grow more crops. Like I sympathize with that and I understand it completely. But again, we're in this situation where technological progress,
Right.
aka escalation, is only enabling more destruction of the planet, more growth, more expansion of industrial society, not allowing for, some great green turning
Right.
and enabling some ecotopia society. That's a fantasy, and it's always been a fantasy.
Is that a fantasy of degrowth in a way? Because they talk about that degrowth says, well, you look at the countries that, okay, I hate using the term third world, but you're looking at these countries and they want to attain a Western lifestyle, everybody, and then you get the conundrum, well, shouldn't everyone have the right to live like the West has enjoyed because they've polluted the rest of it? I mean, where do you take that?
It's a really challenging question, and I absolutely share the critique of the degrowth movement. So I mentioned it at the beginning of the show, but for those who've joined since, I'm doing a master's in degrowth right now, and I'm very critical of degrowth. So I'm kind of on the fence about the whole thing. Am I in the right place? Is this the right idea? But I'm doing it regardless. And what I have noticed is that there's this internal division within the degrowth movement.
Yeah.
And on one hand, you have a more technotopian degrowth, which is often coming out of Europe and is often built around this idea that we need to get everyone in the world to a modest European standard of living and create a lot more renewable energy. These people talk a lot about we don't need degrowth in all sectors of the economy. We need growth in some sectors like renewable energy and degrowth in others like fossil fuels. That's the type of language that they use. And then on the other hand, you have this strain or tendency within degrowth that more often I have seen coming out of people living in the third world or the global south or poorer countries. There's all these euphemistic terms, less developed countries,
yes,
all these things.
Whatever,
it's like saying
underdeveloped.
Underdeveloped.
Like
right.
that's a bad thing. Underdeveloped. That's not a bad thing.
Underpolluted, as Larry Summers once said.
Underpolluted. Oh my God.
Obama's Treasury Secretary, I believe. But that's a side note. You have this strain coming out of the global South, where people are often calling for living much simpler, closer to the land ways of life. And these are often coming from communities that have lived experiences of that, of living ways of life that may have some of the conveniences of modern civilization, because they're pretty much everywhere at this point around the world. You can't get away from them. Most everywhere, not entirely everywhere. But who nonetheless are living much simpler, more communal, closer to the land ways of life. And, in line with that, are causing a lot less environmental harm. There's critiques of that can still be brought up. I think that, I've been somebody who's been critical of agriculture and of the origins of civilization itself, a way of life based on monocrop agriculture for a long time. But in some cases, those debates can sort of get academic, right? And not be that relevant to right now what's happening for people. They're important, I think, because they're foundational. And over a medium term and a longer term, we need to be having those discussions, educating and talking about where are we going in a longer term.
And longer term is loosely used around here.
Right, loosely used. But I see these two strains, and they're sort of battling it out within degrowth. I see more and more of the funding and support tends to go towards the more European perspective that's based on technology still as the savior. But degrowth is sort of a big umbrella, and there are a lot of people who I fundamentally disagree with who say they're part of the degrowth movement. And there are some people who I actually really like, and I think bring some good perspectives. And
all right, so give a good perspective of degrowth that you like.
Well, one of the reasons why I went into this program is that I don't want to concede that terrain, right? We're seeing this term degrowth gain some cultural cachet and start to be discussed, even like in the European Parliament, right? And in different places around the world. There's an increasing understanding based on the failure of, Germany's green miracle, the energy wand, and their attempt to switch to all renewables, and the failures that we've seen to reduce greenhouse gas emissions around the world. They're at their highest level ever. All these failures of the green growth project are mounting, and more people are recognizing, hey, that's not going to work. It's a bad idea. And because of that, a lot of people are just starting to ask the question, what's this degrowth thing, right? What is this alternative? Maybe we have to question economic growth itself. I think that's an excellent starting point. It's not an ending point necessarily, but it's a starting point for a rational, more reasonable discussion about how to deal with the issues we're facing, how to respond to this crisis.
We are societies worldwide that are based on economics and extraction. What'd you say in the beginning? The economics of extraction. Mm-hmm. Pretty much everywhere, even the underdeveloped countries. I mean, because everybody goes there to extract. Mm-hmm. So degrowth is just another economic theory because everything is economics.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that perspective. I think the value that I saw in going into this program was to join that debate and to advocate for a more radical perspective, a more biocentric
That's
perspective,
what I thought.
Which we are seeing from a lot of people all over the world, living in these global South countries, living in the global North, living in some of the wealthiest places in the world, indigenous communities. We're increasingly seeing more people who are saying, look, extracting and burning fossil fuels is not sustainable. Mining is not sustainable. Industrial logging is not sustainable. Industrial fishing is not sustainable. Industrial agriculture has to go. This has to stop. And that brings with it a whole massive swath of problems because our entire global civilization is based on these practices of destroying the planet. But if we can't tell the truth about that and say, look, it's not about ramping this down to a sustainable level. These things can't happen anymore. We need to stop. And to me is the beginning of a rational. I'm using the word rational. I don't even like that word because in some ways I do like it because it is the beginning of a rational conversation on these issues.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's very irrational to say that green growth can continue, or even that we can sort of ramp down consumerism to a lighter version, less destructive version, and live in some sort of light modern way. That to me is not rational. But also, I don't like using that term because these issues are fundamentally, at some level, about values. And, I was just at a gathering with a bunch of tribes in Nevada to talk about some of the issues facing the region. And again, I hear these people, traditional people, most of them, talking about Mother Earth, talking about the land being alive and holding the bones and blood of ancestors, and talking about the water as deserving respect and something that they pray to every morning in their tradition. And that to me is not superstition or irrationality. That is a supremely intelligent adaptation to help people survive and live in right relationship on a living planet to the other forces within that planet that we share this world with, that literally move in and out of our bodies on a daily basis, right? The water and so on. So I'm not willing to concede the scientific rational debate and discussion and just say, we can't have that fight. And I'm also not willing to concede the sort of more spiritual or religious perspective on these issues or values-based perspective. I think both of those battlegrounds need to be fought. And
maybe, melded together. And of course it's worth fighting for, even if the long term is grim with what we're doing. It's still the people like you, people that are out there. It's a wonderful thing for me to see. It's a wonderful thing for a lot of people to see because it's inspirational, and I don't think it's, I don't know, Max, how to say it, because so many people are resigned to just the status quo. So when I have someone that's here with me doing stuff like that, it's inspiring. So thanks. On behalf of probably everybody out in this chat,
I mean, that's the thing. Like Chris Hedges often says, you don't fight fascists because you're going to win. You fight fascists because they're fascists.
Yeah.
And, this is somebody who's faced attacks, I must say, from both left-wing and right-wing authoritarians. Both can and do exist, unfortunately.
Yes, he has.
And, that mindset is based on love, ultimately. If somebody you deeply love is attacked on the street, is getting mugged, right? You don't stand there and calculate your chances of whether you're going to succeed or not and then say, you know what, I'm probably going to lose this fight, so I might as well just go home and watch some Netflix and get DoorDash or something. You go and you intervene, right? If you actually love that person, you go in screaming and kicking,
right,
and you do whatever the hell you can to intervene in that situation. Because that even if you don't win, that is the only thing that could be right in your heart. And that's
saving the mother.
I would love to, that's what I want to communicate to people is we need to fall in love with the land and the rivers and the mountains.
How do we get people that have never had an experience with the natural world, which is probably 5 to 6 billion out of 8 billion that have never had an experience in the natural world, that live in cities, that have no connection and don't even understand the bigger problem that you so very well articulate and understand? How?
That's a good question. I worked as a wilderness guide for many years and off and on still take kids out into wilderness areas. And, I don't, contrary to what some haters might think, I don't take them out there and I'm like, all right, kids, here's why we need to take down industrial civilization.
No.
I'm not indoctrinating them, right? I just take
You're
them
not
out
a
and I'm like,
groomer.
this is what a banana slug is. This is an old growth forest, and this is how the ecology of old
Oh,
growth
Lord,
forest
when you
works.
even have to worry
This
about
is
that.
right. This is the carbon
Shit.
cycle. This is how upwelling in the oceans brings nutrients to the surface and creates this rich life. I educate them about the basics of life.
Beautiful.
And I think I have to applaud all the literally millions and probably billions of people who have been doing the often thankless work of environmental
Oh,
education for a long time, because I don't think many of them see themselves as radical even. And it's not like we as a species, we have evolved to grow up in the natural world in direct relationship every single day with wild beings, plants, animals,
yes.
birds, reptiles, insects, soil,
Squirrels.
rivers. Yeah. And that's how we've evolved. E.O. Wilson talks about biophilia, this idea that we have this inherent thing within us that we love nature. We just love it because that's an adaptive trait, is one way to look at that. Another way to look at it is, you know, this is literally our family. We have evolved out of the family of life. We are literally, scientifically speaking, the relatives of all other life on the planet. They are our relatives. It's not a metaphor. It's not a metaphor. It's not like some poetry shit. They are our relatives, literally. And there's a mass extinction happening. So I think that there's no shortcut. I wish there was like some easy way that I could say, here's the best way to get people to care about nature. I think it's a direct experience. And I think we have to educate people. We have to take people outside. We have to advocate for, nature and connection to nature at every level. I recognize that there are challenges in that, even on the level of, some of the most beautiful places in the world are being loved to death by the number of tourists they're getting. People who are looking for that biophilia, who want to connect to nature.
Even by
So
getting on these mega cruise ships. Holy
yeah,
shit.
in some cases they want to go see the whales and so on. And I have to honor that, even though, it's being wrapped in this sort of capitalist facade, this circus of unsustainability and madness.
It's
But
madness. I'm
it's
sorry. It's
madness. But
madness to
then
see pictures of those cruise ships. That's
it is.
madness. It's insanity. This whole thing is just, first of all, not first of all, but this is what came up when you were talking about that and people with nature. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, how many of us numbers, how sustainable is our population on this planet?
It's not. It's simply not. I mean, the idea that 8 billion people are sustainable is absurd. I think there were around 1 billion people in the early 1800s. So over 200,000 years that humans have existed on this planet in our modern form,
Yep.
anatomical form, our numbers were a tiny fraction of what they are now. Most of the people who are alive today are only alive because of fossil fuel fertilizers, specifically a chemical process called the Haber-Bosch process, which is used to split natural gas, fracked gas, into ammonium fertilizers. Most of the nitrogen in our bodies, those molecules come from fossil fuel molecules. They were underground. They were pumped out of a fossil fuel well, sprayed onto agricultural fields, and then they were uptaken by plants and we ate them. And that's the nitrogen in your body right now. That's a lot of it. So, even Norman Borlaug, who was one of the founders of the Green Revolution, he did a lot of plant breeding that, massively increased crop yields. And that has fueled a lot of population growth. Even this guy who got a Nobel Prize for this work, he said, this is a stopgap measure. This is like a way to buy time to stop people from starving, to hopefully solve this issue of ever-growing population. I think what prompted you to reach out, Sandy, was this Twitter thread I posted a couple weeks back about population.
I didn't pull it up, but
It's fine. It's fine. I basically was writing about how as soon as you bring up population, a lot of people love to start attacking you right away. It's like, if you bring up population, you're a racist, you're a terrible person, you're genocidal, you're a maniac, you want to murder billions of people.
That's
And
crazy.
you can't even have a conversation about it so many times because people aren't willing to even entertain the idea that we can talk about these things, without, like, having a conversation about population does not mean you're a maniac. It does not mean
or a eugenicist or a racist. I know,
and
I know. But
the thing
that's the
is,
world we live in.
the unfortunate reality, this is another one of those situations where I think a lot of people who are living in sort of an internet bubble in the United States and wealthy parts of the world don't understand that there are a lot of activists, grassroots activists, and community organizers in places like Iran and Pakistan and Bangladesh and South America, all throughout South America, throughout the entire world, in the United States, in Europe, in Japan, in Australia, who are working on these issues, working on issues of overpopulation from a perspective that's rooted in respect for human rights and the dignity of human beings. And that is rejecting and trying to learn from some of the excesses and the mistakes made in, for example, China's one-child policy, right, which caused a lot of very serious issues, a lot of very serious problems, not least the selective abortion of females, of female fetuses. So this conversation's important. We need to be having it. It's not easy to have the conversation, but I think it's very important.
Jennifer and I have had shows on it. We've talked about it. It's a conversation we have, and we have it from a female-centric view that, empowerment too, which is unfortunately in the United States is now also we're under threat. We're under threat that we're all going to be wearing bonnets and Gilead. Am I reacting to the fear porn? Maybe I am, but it goes to that too. It's empowering people, and here's another wrinkle to it: religion, and now it's just no birth control. It's just go forth and have and multiply. How I don't see realistically how that's ever going to be overcome.
Yeah, it's really challenging. I mean, we have this ideology that many people in the world subscribe to, where they're actually sort of looking forward to the end of the world because it means the return, right? And that it's challenging. I don't want to be disrespectful to Christians or to anyone of any particular religion, because there are amazing and beautiful human beings who are part of every religious group on the planet.
That's not what I'm saying at all.
Understand these issues and are advocating for them and are taking really good perspectives and doing amazing work, right? You can't, massive. I don't want to paint with a broad brush. And that said, one of the reasons why the rhetoric around overpopulation is so inflammatory these days is because in the lead up to the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, the Catholic Church deliberately worked to build a narrative connecting any discussion of overpopulation to racism and to the history of eugenics, which are brutal and terrible histories that must be exposed and need to be discussed. They need to be taught to children in schools at age-appropriate levels, and so on, right? The Catholic Church did this deliberately to undermine movements to bring birth control and family planning and, abortion services and so on to women and girls around the world, because that movement was gaining too much traction. It was gaining too much traction. And so they built a movement to create a backlash against it. And it's been very effective. It's been very effective to the detriment of women, to the detriment of girls, to the detriment of the planet, and even to the detriment of men around the world. Because in many places, if you actually take a survey of people's desires, most people, the average in the world is that most couples want to have 2 kids. maybe just under or
Not
just
here.
over 2 kids. And if that were the case, population would be stable, right? So
Yeah, if.
many of these families which have a lot of kids, they're not doing well. They're struggling. They're struggling very much financially because of the situation that
Have you
they're
been in
in.
an Amish community? I live in an Amish
I
community.
I never have, no.
Okay, I live in an Amish community, and they have the average family has 8 kids, and they are all very entrenched in their life. The church that they don't have a central church. They go to each other's houses. The kids go to school until maybe 7th grade, 8th grade, and then they work. Or the girls are they're sort of a Gilead deal there. But they have many kids. But their resources, they use a lot less resources.
Mm.
That's the difference between the community there. But they're not going to just stop having 8 and 9 kids.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of these situations, you need long-term programs to try and change the course of the situation. And in a population level, at a big picture level, it's not that big of a deal that some people want to have more kids, right? As long as the average is at replacement or below replacement, then you can have population going down. And it is doing that naturally in some places around the world, notably Japan, Russia, some other places. And one of the other issues that I want to bring up, Sandy, is that we can't leave out of the discussion of population the discussion of consumption, which you just brought up in regards to the Amish, right?
Mhm.
Because any ecologist, anyone who studies population dynamics, knows that scientists actually use a formula to discuss these things. They say that the environmental impact of a community, a human community, equals population multiplied by affluence multiplied by technology.
Mhm.
They call it IPAT. Impact equals population times affluence times technology.
Right.
And what that means is that one person living in the United States, consuming a lot, buying a lot of things, using a lot of energy, living in a big house, etc., may have significantly more impact than 8 or 10 people living in Senegal or the Seychelles or different poorer parts of the world where people don't consume as much. Of course, that doesn't mean that those poor people aren't having an impact. We're seeing major environmental impacts in poor countries, poor
Major.
communities all over the world,
Major.
right? You can't ignore that side of it. And at the same time, we can't ignore the consumption side of it, which is massive. I mean, the per person impact of people in the United States is out of control. And it's, of course, you can't just look at it even at a national level. It's skewed within the US by income massively, right?
Massively.
The impact that the rich are having is just orders of magnitude larger than the poor. I mean, there was all the hullabaloo over Taylor Swift's private jet a couple weeks ago, right?
How many private jets took off from the Super Bowl? It was like 900.
Yeah.
I mean, that just makes you feel like you're fucked, no matter what.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I'm sorry.
it does.
It does.
Well, this
but
is.
We're in collapse. A collapse-aware community, and so we just have to hug each other, Max.
Well, this is. I recommend Kim Stanley Robinson's book, Ministry for the Future. It's not like I agree with everything in that book or that I think it's a blueprint for the future or something, but it's fascinating as a case study and a thought experiment. And one of the things that happens, so the book starts out, I won't ruin it because this is literally the very first scene in the book. And maybe it'll get more people to read it, but it starts off with a massive heat wave hitting a region in India. And they hit the wet bulb temperature, which is the temperature where people can't survive.
Right.
Outside, can't survive without air conditioning. And at the same time, they're having blackouts and brownouts. So there is no AC. And what happens is that a huge number of people die. I forget what the number is in the book, but it's like tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people die from heat exposure during this lengthy heat dome event. And so the first chapter of that book is just grim. It's incredibly grim. And one of the results of this, as I said earlier, is that people are fucking pissed, of course, right? And so they form this underground movement forms that says, we are going to shut down the fossil fuel industry and shut down the industries that are causing global warming by any means necessary. And we don't give a fuck what people say about us or think about us or what people do in response. We're just going to do it. And one of the things that they do, which the morality of this is very questionable, but it's worth having the discussion. I think it's essentially a real world trolley problem. Well, it's not real world because it's just a fiction book. But one of the things that they do is on this certain day, they do a coordinated action where they use missiles or something or drones, and they blow up like 30 passenger airlines all on the same day at the same time. So they kill out 5,000 people or something, right? It's a major act of what
it's not a movie yet, is it?
Right? It's not a movie, no.
No. Somebody will pick it up.
They release a message and they say, look, commercial air travel is done. It's over. It cannot happen ever again. And if it does, then we will do this, this will continue. And as a result of that, because people are fucking scared, obviously, to fly, air travel drops by like 99.5% overnight, right?
Right.
So this is fascinating to me because when we're in extreme situations, the morality becomes challenging to judge what's right and what's wrong. Mm-hmm. And, this is something that we have seen even in the real world today. Look at Nigeria, the biggest oil producing country in Africa. It was colonized by the British for many years. Shell Oil Corporation has extracted a ton of oil there. And in the Niger River Delta, which is the largest wetland, the largest estuary and river delta in Africa, there has been the equivalent of an Exxon Valdez oil spill every year for 60 years. That is how much pollution. Yeah, it makes me want to vomit. I mean, that is how much pollution this one area has experienced. And the indigenous communities of this area, they formed a nonviolent resistance movement for many years, led by a poet named Ken Saro-Wiwa, among other people.
I know.
And the military dictatorship under Shell, in cooperation with Shell, arrested these people on trumped up charges and hung them in, I believe, early 1990s. I forget the year. Maybe it was 95. So these Ken Saro-Wiwa and these other nonviolent movement leaders were killed. They were murdered by the state with the cooperation of Shell and their security forces. And one of the response to this was that people took up weapons because nonviolent resistance had essentially been made illegal. There were also massacres at this time where police opened fire and killed literally hundreds of protesters, just nonviolent protesters, like everyday people who were just marching and chanting and trying to get justice. And so this group formed called the Movement for the Emancipation of the Niger Delta, and they started using sabotage to attack oil pipelines and different facilities of the oil industry in Nigeria. And they also did things like kidnapping workers. From what I know, they were all treated very well. There's a film called Sweet Crude where one of them's interviewed and he says, I was treated great. And actually, these people are right. They're morally righteous in what they're doing. And, this industry needs to stop. So there was certainly a moral sensibility behind what they were doing, right? They weren't just torturing people or something like that. Even though, again, the morality of kidnapping people is very tenuous at best, right? Yes. But nonetheless, in one single sabotage action, they knocked out 40% of Nigeria's oil capacity. 40%. That is more effective than the entire environmental movement has been across the Western world ever. And they did that with one sabotage attack, right? So that's that's the power of these methods if they're applied in the right way with moral consideration. I'm not pretending this is easy or that these questions are simple.
What's the outcome in Nigeria?
Well, I wish I could say that it was great that they got the oil companies out and got to some sort of utopia, but instead what happened is the U.S. sent in all kinds of military advisors, special forces units to train the Nigerian military, and they created a whole program to basically bribe people into leaving these groups. And over the period of about a decade, all this was happening right around when the BP oil spill happened. That was really the heyday.
That was a big one.
When was that? 2013? So
you don't ask me.
Maybe it was earlier than that. 2011. We're getting old.
We're getting old. No, you're not. You keep going. How you doing out there in the chat? Man, what a conversation. Should we take some questions or some comments?
I'd love to.
There's lots of people. Lots of people. All right, guys. We're gonna marathon this one. Let's see here. All right. I clipped some favorites. So first of all, I want to say thank you to somebody who gave me a super chat. Thank you very much. They're very lovely. I have a very lovely bunch of people. Okay, here's okay, this is very important. Max is talking about the children of Kali in
Kim Stanley Robinson.
Yeah, Ministry for Future, which brings up a deeper question. Who are the real eco-terrorists?
Absolutely.
Gary, I hope you're still here. Mm-hmm. Gary's wonderful. We have the best. Yeah, I would say. Okay. United Nations media. The preppers are fundamentalist Christians and New Age conspiracy theorists who will kill greenies when the inevitable fall happens. Ooh.
A lot of them are. A lot of them are. I completely agree. I actually have some of those folks in my neighborhood. So I'm pretty scared of them.
I'm sure I do. I'm
scared of them.
Well, I'm not scared of... I don't feel scared of anything anymore, really.
She's fearless.
Make America Green Again. Valerie Cabanis, born 1969, is a French lawyer and environmentalist. She is noted as a proponent of the idea of ecocide as a new crime under international law by destroying the ecosystems on which and we know the rest of it. Wow.
Yeah, Make America Green Again. I actually wrote a piece about this recently. What's it called? It's on my Substack, and it's called "Ecocide is Legal: Tar Sands Ecocide Law and the Limits of Systemic Change." Yeah, you might be interested in it because I was asked to write a contribution for this German anthology on ecocide law, like a compilation of short pieces. And this is the piece. This is what I submitted. So it's not published in English. It's in German, but I published it on my Substack. And looking at this issue, because I think it's an important one, just briefly, what I think is the key weakness of these approaches is that they're only looking at environmental crimes. The definition only includes environmental crimes. So something like the BP oil spill might be able to fall under the ecocide law, these ecocide laws which are being proposed and pursued, which I think would be great. But the problem that I write about in this essay is that much of the destruction of the planet, the vast majority of it, is legal. It has been legalized by a legal system that not only allows it subsidizes it and protects it, right?
So we should run
problems with ecocide law. It's a step. I think it's worth pursuing, but it's not a panacea at all.
So we should be on town boards instead of the Board of Education. It should be on the town boards that approves all these projects.
I'm definitely in favor of
people should
anyone
get involved.
Who's on our side to get involved.
Why not?
Yeah.
Okay, Jordan Perry, are you still with us, Jordan? Proud Doomer here. Hi, Jordan and Karen's they are in our chat tonight, Jordan and Karen. Proud Doomer here, standing up for the right to speak truth about the predicament. It's not about quitting. It's about positioning for, wait a minute, for wise responses with an honest assessment of current reality. I like that one, Jordan.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks, Jordan. I'm familiar with some of your work. I've watched a couple of your videos, so I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And that one of the things that I always try and put in my presentations and public talks is to tell people ecological collapse is not a future scenario. It's actually been
It's
underway
happening.
for, depending on how you look at things, maybe 8 to 10,000 years, if you believe it began with the origins of civilization, which I really do, but certainly at a rapid pace for several hundred years. I mean, some people point to the beginning of the burning of fossil fuels, but Europe was
No, Lyle,
deforested.
my guest on Tuesday, Lyle Lewis, he said, what was it? It was before fossil
Yeah.
fuels. It started before
Yeah,
fossil fuels.
most of this continent was destroyed without the
Oh,
help of fossil fuels, right? The extinction of the buffalo, the clearing of the vast old growth forests. The clearing of the forests of Europe, the destruction of the soils of
unreal.
Mesopotamia. So we are definitely in a shifting baseline situation where people think, that things are
Oh, shit.
okay if we get back to 350 parts per million, which is a pipe dream, if you ask me.
Opium.
And I mean, I'm not the only one to say that. There's a quote I often
No,
like.
everybody on this channel says that. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
well, the
Uh-uh.
at one of the climate conferences a while back, I think it was Copenhagen, the small island states put out a statement talking about how 350 parts per million is a death sentence for small island states and low-lying countries like them. And I think that's really important to point out, because not only are we in a shifting baseline in terms of ecological health, we're in a shifting baseline in terms of what goals we're trying to reach.
Yeah.
I mean, environmentalists not that long ago were saying, let's end all logging on national forests and public lands in the United States, period. Let's end it all. And, that goal has been lost. That there are a few people still advocating for that. But if you look at the big environmental groups, I mean,
Some of them are
they're all caught up
backing
in
carbon capture.
carbon credits and
Oh,
renewable energy.
fuck
So
that. I'm sorry. I don't have my patience meter tonight to get into talking about carbon credits and all that. We're gonna get Karen up here. Yep, grow more food, grow more people. We are Homo fossil fuels, i.e., Homo colossus. We are Homo fossil fuelists from earlier, actually. I'm sorry. I'm not cutting you off. I just know that will take us down a whole other rabbit hole. That's an hour conversation in itself.
yeah.
Okay. Astrologer, climate witness, overpopulation is objective fact. What is done about it? Well, it's another thing, but you cannot get most, not even to entertain it as a fact. No, it's hard to talk about it. But all right, so here's Prairie Fire. Hello. Overpopulation is a bit overblown. For the most part, urbanization pretty much makes that go away. In rural areas, children are an asset because of free labor. In towns, they're expensive furniture. Hello.
I'd love to respond to that one. Prairie Fire, I think that, well, I would disagree. And one, I want to explain
Kowalski,
why.
Prairie Fire. That's
there's a great book called Imperial San Francisco, which talks about the history of the development of the city of San Francisco. Could you keep that comment up, Sandy, so I can reference it? But in this book, he brings back a term which I think is really useful, which is contado. And contado is an old Italian term from the era of the city-states, when like Venice was its own country, right? And it controlled the little area and so on. And contado referred to the area that was controlled by the city-state, but was also exploited by the city-state for resources. So I think it's actually a mistake to think of cities as being these relatively small, self-contained areas in which, millions of people can live together on top of one another and have a minimal environmental impact. It's more accurate to think of the city as like the nucleus of a cell, which spreads out far wider, when you look at the supply chains that exist to feed that city, to bring in food and energy and raw materials. And so often, in my opinion, the campaigns to, for example, create more dense urbanization to allow for cities to build up rather than sprawl out, which so many environmentalists are pursuing, that may be a less harmful alternative. But in reality, it's sort of skirting the issue of overpopulation. It's sort of trying to address the problem without actually addressing the problem.
It's overshoot.
Overshoot.
And Prairie Fire should read William Catton's book, Overshoot. My friend.
Yeah, it's a good book.
His name is Kowalski, though I'm thrilled that he came. That's cool.
Yeah, Kowalski. And also I wrote another article that's on my Substack about cities. And it's called Can a City Be Sustainable? And you can probably guess what my answer is going to be, but you might like it. You might get something out of it. I hope you will. That was published in Earth Island Journal, actually. And I'm proud of that piece. So I recommend checking it out if you're interested. It dives into these issues a little bit more deeply.
Okay. I'm looking at all these comments. I'm sorry. I started giggling because it's Friday night. Everybody's chit-chatting in there. All right. Here's Gary Hoover. Gary said overpopulation is an elitist conversation right now. Human population and affluence are both issues, or birth issues, but more, I see. Both their issues, but more of affluence. You think? You still here,
we
Gary?
kind of talked about that, but I mean, I think there are elite people talking about overpopulation, and some of their conversations, I'm sure, are very much informed by their class status, and take perspectives on the issue that I think many of us would disagree with or find challenging to agree with. But I think that, the reality is, like I said, there are people working all over the world, including in the poorest communities, on issues of overpopulation. One of the people who I like to point out to sometimes is this Iranian activist. She was actually the founder of the Iranian environmental movement, and her name was Malaga Mala. Mm-hmm. She was a librarian, and she helped found one of the first and main environmental groups, the Women's Society Against Environmental Pollution in Iran, and spoke up very seriously and critically about issues of overpopulation. At the time, Iran had a birth rate of like 7 kids on average per woman. And they created a program to bring that down in humane ways, surprisingly, given that Iran is not exactly the poster child for human rights or women's rights around the world. But this has also been done in places like South Korea and many places around the world, through education, family planning classes for couples when they get married.
That's the ideal way.
Making birth control really widely available, clinics, mobile clinics to even visit the most remote communities. Pretty straightforward stuff that not only addresses the issues of overpopulation, but also just generally improves people's quality of life, reduces STDs, reduces a lot of the problem with overpopulation is actually just accidental and unintended pregnancies. It's a huge number of the kids that are born
don't be in the United States anymore. Right.
Yeah, they're not planned. It's not like the couple said, okay, we want to have a kid. We're making a positive decision to have a child together. It just happened. It was an accident for one reason or another.
Yes.
And addressing that problem would solve the problem completely, just like Jean said there.
Yes. Empowerment of women. Problem solved. Everyone has something to say here. Hello, everyone. Okay, where are we? I'm trying to get to... All right, I'll get to Nadia. Wait, what?
I'm going to stoke my fire real quick.
Okay, wait. Here we go.
Back.
Oh, okay. All right, guys. He'll be right back. Nadia, thank you. I've got a video call creating a schedule conflict, but never mind. Thwaites, Pine Island, the real doomsday glaciers are Denman and Totten. Thank you, Nadia. Yeah, well, we're going to start talking about that. Thank you, Kowalski. Prairie Fire. I had a college professor in my last semester at university tell us that they weren't sure if democracy could survive social media. Pointed to a PragerU video as misinformation. That was all wrong. Of course, PragerU. And there are school districts that are accepting Prager University. Hang on, I gotta move this. All right, so I somehow got these things to be gigantic. I need to make them not gigantic. This is funny. I guess we're getting late. We've been on a long time. But I can't fix it. It's like not wanting to fix. It's pretty funny. They're huge. I don't know if I can fix it. Let's see if it's this way here. It's been a good show, though. It's been a really interesting conversation. Let's see. Have you ever... Oh, let me fix it. But have you ever read Ishmael by Daniel Quinn? I can fix this now, I think.
Fantastic book. Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
Talk about that for a minute while I'm fixing this.
Oh, boy. It's been some years, but basically
Right.
Ishmael is one of the foundational texts of the anti-civilization or civilization critical movement.
Mm-hmm.
And the story revolves around this this gorilla, I believe, who can communicate with the main character and sort of educates him. It's sort of a parable, educates him about the way of the world and so on. But a really fantastic book.
All right.
Daniel Quinn sort of has gone down the road of sort of withdrawal from society. Like he is a little bit more anti-political engagement than I am. Which is not to say I don't respect his work or don't respect his books. I absolutely do. I think they're incredibly important. But I think that it's really important for us to take action, which is probably apparent to everyone who's listening. So
it's fixed. And it was Kristen Rose. So we were all listening to you and I was fixing it. So now we can do more comments because Karen loves Ishmael and it's a trilogy. Must read for all. Yeah. All right, cool. Yeah.
Recommend it. It's an easy, short read, really short book.
All right. Now, Prairie Fire. Oh, he's still with us. I'm gonna let him have the floor tonight. Sperm count dropping isn't really a concern and has more to do with sitting culture. Again, urbanization. He's right. We talked about this. Oh no, this fucking thing is just not wanting to cooperate tonight. I don't know why.
Technology strikes back.
But yeah, technology strikes back. It's like my mouse doesn't want to work. Maybe it's trying to tell me that we've been on a long time. But yes, sitting culture. We talked about that the other night. Yes. And all right, Brandy, she's making it funny, a funny face. All right, why don't you tell us what you would like to talk about while I fix this? Again, Max, you have the floor. It's your show tonight.
Well, I'm just really glad that folks are joining for this. It sounds like there are a lot of interesting people here.
Hell yeah.
I mean, one of the lessons for me that's come out of Thacker Pass and the fight to stop that lithium mine and so on is that it's really tempting for people like us who are sort of radical and have a deep understanding of these issues and these problems. It's really easy for us to get frustrated with the fact that average people don't understand these issues, right? It's easy for us to get annoyed and be impatient and to not want to do the grassroots, slow, painstaking, long-term work of educating people and then organizing people around these issues. And I guess that's one of my calls to action for our conversation tonight, Sandy, is there's no shortcuts. We need to do that work. And I think even if you're a doomer, as you know, you are, and I know many people who are watching are, I think it's still important that we do it, because
Hell yeah.
that's how
I'm
we
Doomer
align with
Light.
our,
I've been called Doomer
yeah.
Light or adjacent. Doomer adjacent.
Uh,
There's what it is.
yeah,
Dr.
I
Jeremy says we
I
are
personally have
Doomer
no
adjacent.
patience whatsoever for the people who are,
And
well, I say
labels,
that, but I
labels
actually do.
suck, really.
I don't have much patience for the people who just say, everything's fucked. Let's just go party, or, I'm just going to
Nobody's
enjoy
like
my
that
life.
here. We're all here just
I think
learning
probably a lot of those people I actually feel compassion for, because I think a lot of those people are depressed for good reason, right? Like, a lot of those people are really struggling.
Jordan
struggling
says
with their
to
mental
you,
health.
sweet. Oh, well.
Yeah. Struggling with
That's
community,
another
struggling
show.
with this individual culture, all this stuff, and so I want to have compassion for that, but I also want to push for, let's take action. Let's do the long, hard work. Let's put in the time. Let's put in the work over years and decades and generations. Because, I used to be one of those people who was just like, I'm radical. I understand what's going on. I understand these problems.
I love the
If
passion.
you can't get with the program, then I have no time for you. But I'm a little bit slower now. I don't have time for people who are like actively against me. But, even the bright greens, even the people, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt, because I used to think that solar panels were a solution. I'm outing myself right here, Sandy. I used to think that electric cars were part of the solution. I wasn't as foolish as I think some of these ideas that we see floating around are. I knew that consumerism was a problem, that growth was a problem, and so on from a young age. But I was lucky to grow up with those lessons. And, everyone, there was an old Malcolm X quote. It was something like, don't be too quick to judge something because he doesn't know something, he or she doesn't know something that you yourself didn't know at one time, So I think we need to put in the long, slow time and not be holier than thou and not be too snarky. We can be snarky when it's just us, but when we're working with the public and collaborating with people and so on, I think we need to take the time and be thoughtful and take a deliberate long-term organizing approach to these issues and change the course of society as much as we can.
I got plenty of those in the chat. Obsolete optics, you're hired.
Yeah.
I'm of the Michael C. Rupert mindset. I gave up on the average person a long time ago. Now I only serve the exceptional ones.
Yeah, I hear that. For sure. Yeah, I mean, we got to choose where we put our energy, for sure. We got to choose.
Hey, Jeff,
choose wisely.
I'm a late doomer, he says. Well, okay. We're having fun out there in the chat. This is a good show. I'm trying to catch it's going fast.
Right.
Oh, yep. No. My advice.
Yeah.
Oh, United Nations Media. My advice, don't be sad or dressed. Fight, and know nature will sort it all out in the end, and a new beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And a new beginning. Well, we have to have that, because we have to have that. It's not hopium. I mean, things are going to come to a logical conclusion for the human species. They come to a logical conclusion for every species. We're no different. We're no different. We're just fouling our nest, though. We fouled our nest. Okay, so I think we have been an hour and 43 minutes. Whew. All right, guys, what do you think? I think we are going to wrap it up. And here, Tim Bob, can we put slow mode on the economy? Yeah, that's good. I want to say thanks to everybody. Thanks, Kim, for moderating. And Obsolete Optics, and everybody that did super chats. Thank you. Max, I'm going to give you the end, the bring up the rear.
Well, my final words would be, Sandy, that I like you think that we're headed for collapse, not a collapse of ecology, because like I said earlier, that's already underway, but a collapse of civilization, a collapse of this way of life. And I think that entails things that are bad, that we would say are morally bad, like mass starvation. Not very nice.
Not very nice.
It also entails things that are probably good, like reduction in pollution, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, etc. I really think the challenge moving forward is how do we steer this collapse, if possible, in the best direction possible, the best direction that
I
we
like
can.
that.
And
I love
I
that.
think we can do it. I don't presume that we have absolute control or power, but I think we can steer the ship a little bit in some ways that will create more
Organizing.
positive outcomes.
You know, people are organizing in so many different ways. They're organizing against all these militant cop cities that are being built all over the country to militarize the police departments and have training. So it's the joke is that it's like, are they training the bunker security? Shit. Oh, we could go down some rabbit holes. All right, everybody. Yeah. I thank you for coming. It was a fun show. It was a heavy show, and there's a lot to think of. And yeah, right, doomers are the new deniers. We are not. That's putting down people that have a wider view of what's going on. That's all. But it doesn't have to be a name. Anyway, I hope you come back soon. I hope everything that works for you, that is going to work for you. I will have links in the show notes of where to get in touch with you, or where to find your writing and all that. And I just wish you the best. Like I wish everybody all the time.
Appreciate it. Same to you. Yeah, I hope you have a great night, and happy Friday to everyone. Hope
happy
everyone's
Friday, guys.
Got a nice weekend ahead of you.
Happy Friday. All right.